Thanks everyone for joining tonight. We know especially in this time of virtual events, you could have been anywhere, but we appreciate that you are here with us tonight. My name is Margaret Treadwell, and I'd just like to welcome everyone to an information session, kind of interactive talk about bird monitoring programs on the North Coast and how you can get outside, shake off some of that cabin fever, and contribute a bit to the health of our environment and our wildlife populations in a fun way. So I'd like to do a round of introductions real quick, and then talk about what we're going to cover tonight. So if anyone has any questions, also feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat if you have access to that. And we will get to them as soon as we can. So as I said, my name is Margaret Treadwell, and I'm the program coordinator for Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And with me tonight are Joe Liebezeit, who is the staff scientist and avian conservation manager for Portland Audubon. Allison Anholt, who is the Coastal Community Science Coordinator for Portland Audubon, sorry. And also on the line are Tabea Goosen, who is a volunteer Black oyster catcher monitor. And we also have Kelly Ennis, who's the director of Haystack Rock Awareness Program, and they will both speak a little bit later. So our agenda for tonight is an overview of the Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, and then going over some community science projects, so Black oyster catcher monitoring, seabird monitoring, pelican surveys, plover patrol, and a few other opportunities on the North Coast. And then we'll have time for a Q&A and also a door prize drawing. So we have 4 door prizes. That includes 2 coupons to the Portland Audubon Nature Store for $25, a Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve water bottle, which you can see here, and also a set of 5 Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve note cards, which is worth about $30. So hang tight, and after you've gotten all your information and questions answered, we will give those prizes away. So I just want to talk a bit about Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, which is located off of Oswald West State Park between Arch Cape and Manzanita, and it includes this beautiful spot, Short Sand Beach. It's one of 5 marine reserves that Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife oversees on the Oregon coast. And most of these also include marine protected areas, which you can see on this map in red. Cape Falcon site is the northernmost, and these are all located in Oregon's territorial waters, which go out 3 miles from shore. A little tongue-tied tonight. Oregon created marine reserves with 3 goals, which are to conserve marine habitats and biodiversity, to provide living laboratories for doing scientific research, which is what these projects contribute to, and to do all of this while avoiding significant economic impact. So you may be wondering, what is a marine reserve? Well, it's a place where all removal of marine life is prohibited and ocean development is also prohibited. And then there are marine protected areas next to the marine reserves at most sites, not all. And in these spots, ocean development is still prohibited, but some fishing activities are allowed. So this is a map of the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, and you can see that it has the no-take marine reserve here in red, and then there are 2 marine protected areas. In the west marine protected area, you can fish for salmon by troll and crab, and you can do crabbing. And then the shoreside MPA runs along Falcon Cove Beach, and you can do recreational fishing by hook and line from the sandy beach only. And part of what makes this a great spot for marine reserve is it's right next to Oswald West State Park, which is conserved forest, and so having that land and sea right next to each other really helps boost the resilience of conserved ecosystems on both. And it's also right next to the proposed rainforest reserve that North Coast Land Conservancy is working on, which will add an additional 5,000 acres, creating habitat connectivity and wildlife corridors to really help all the wildlife in this area. So the Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, our role is to support the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and outreach and education about the Marine Reserve. And we do that through hikes, lectures, boat tours, research and monitoring, which includes ocean acidification monitoring with Oregon State University, and also community science, which includes seabird monitoring, other bird monitoring projects, and an intertidal BioBlitz. And I just want to take a moment to thank our volunteers, a few of whom are on the line tonight. We really couldn't do what we do without our volunteers. They help with community science, tabling at community events, and with outreach and stewardship programs like the Trail Ambassadors and Beach Ambassadors. And we're so grateful for their support and time and energy and their friendship. And we hear that volunteers get a lot of enjoyment out of it too. So as I mentioned, Tabea is on the line to talk about black oyster catcher monitoring, which she does north of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And then I corresponded with one of our dedicated volunteers for seabird monitoring, and she shared with us by email what she enjoys about volunteering for that project. So here is what she wrote to me. She says, one of the great joys of my life is to sit still in the presence of animals and learn how they live. At Cape Falcon, we watch pelagic cormorants and others too from far away, so they can see, so that they are not disturbed, but with scopes that allow us to see them clearly. We look for a glimpse of eggs or chicks to count, but until they move, we get to see them on watch, alert yet settled for hours in a way humans could never manage, yelling at intruders, grooming their feathers, rearranging the cliff nest, and adjusting eggs without exposing them to our view. I have learned tremendous respect for each pair's dedication to parenting. So that's just sort of a glimpse of what you might experience if you were to volunteer for these projects. And before I move it along to Joe and Allison to get more in depth, I just wanted to share my contact info. Feel free to contact me and visit our website to subscribe to our email newsletter and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joe and also switch what I'm sharing so that you can see his presentation. So just a minute to that.
It's coming.
Right.
I'll start talking about these projects that you can participate in, and I will also introduce Allison Anholt, our new Coastal Community Science Coordinator, and she'll talk about the Plover Patrol project at the end. But I'll give you a quick snapshot of these projects and talk to you about what they entail a bit and some of our findings and how that information is used in conservation. So go ahead to the next slide. So a little bit about Portland Audubon. We're the oldest conservation organization in Oregon. We were established way back in 1902. And our president at that time was William Finley, who you can see in this photograph here with Henry Bowman, his colleague, scaling up Three Arch Rock to these poor common murres up there, which you wouldn't want to do nowadays. That's what ornithologists did back then. But back then, that was during the Teddy Roosevelt administration, and their expeditions to these places in Oregon like Three Arch Rock and Malheur and Klamath led to their lobbying for stronger protections. And now we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife National Wildlife Refuge off of our coast, including Three Arch Rock. So Portland Audubon has quite a legacy on the coast and in Oregon. Jumping ahead to the 1980s up into the present, we've been focusing a lot of our conservation work on marbled murrelets. They're an endangered species, as a lot of you attending today, I'm sure, know that, and they have the unique life history where they nest in old growth and mature forests and forage in the nearshore waters, including here in Oregon. And back in the late 80s and early 90s, we were one of the groups that lobbied to get them to be in the endangered species list. More recently in 2012, Margaret already talked to you about the marine reserves we have in Oregon, the 5 marine reserves. We were part of a coalition of a bunch of different groups to get them designated. And in 2016, we helped protect forage fish species that were at the time unprotected for And our angle on that was protecting them as a prey for seabirds. We did that both in federal waters off the West Coast. We were part of a coalition to help do that, and also in our state waters. Why don't you go to the next slide? So community science, or some of you may know it as citizen science, is for Portland Audubon, we kind of have these 3 buckets of goals associated with that. So obviously we want to outreach and create awareness on birds and the habitats they use, so that people like you in the audience can care about them and be stewards of them, and help in our efforts to protect them. We also want to collect scientific information that will inform management, conservation, and policy. And I guess that the third goal there is kind of part of the first one in a way. It's creating that initial outreach and then cultivating folks like you to help us in our conservation interests. Go ahead to the next slide. So our current conservation priorities, not just for Portland Audubon, but for all the other 11 Audubon chapters in Oregon, are up here on the screen here. So seabird protection, as I mentioned, marbled murrelets are one of our kind of key seabird species that we've been focused on for years with other Audubon chapters in Oregon. We're also right now at this very moment working on protecting rocky habitats, and Margaret Treadwell, and one of her other hats is very, very involved in this effort as well. So if you want to learn more about that, please talk to Margaret or myself. I won't talk much about the marine reserves. Margaret covered that really well, but I will mention that in 2023, just a couple of years from now, the Oregon legislature will be making a decision on how that program moves forward. So we'll be mobilizing potentially people in the next couple of years to, make sure we keep our 5 reserves that we have, and hopefully set the stage for more in the future. In terms of eelgrass and estuaries, estuaries in Oregon are very important for a lot of different reasons, for ecology and for the economy. And the plans, the estuary management plans, are being updated for the first time since they were originally written in the 1980s. And so there's going to be an opportunity moving forward to help strengthen those plans and get a lot more conservation in them. And then finally, offshore renewable energy is becoming a reality in a lot of places, including now in Oregon. And we're in the very early stages of it, but we want to make sure that when wind energy comes into Oregon in offshore, that it's placed in places that minimize impact to wildlife and birds and other marine life. Go ahead to the next slide. So now we'll just jump into the different projects, and like I said before, just give you a quick snapshot. So our Oregon Black Oyster Catcher project, we've been running since 2015. And prior to that, USGS had been doing some oyster catcher monitoring, but they ran out of funding in the mid-2000s, and we kind of reestablished the project. And our goals are, collect information on the population size, the distribution of birds on our coast, and more recently, we're focusing on the nesting success of these birds across our coast. And as you can see, all the logos here, we have a lot of different partners, of course, Friends of Cape Falcon, but also key partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Haystack Rock Awareness Program on the North Coast is also an important partner, and all the other Audubon chapters down along the coast. We'll go ahead to the next slide. So why oyster catchers? Well, black oyster catchers are a species of conservation concern. They're in Oregon's nearshore strategy as a species of concern. They are also kind of they're considered one of the top predators in the intertidal zone. So if the intertidal zone isn't doing well, it's likely the oyster catchers are not doing well. They're also a great species for a community scientist to study, because they're easy to identify. You don't have to be a great birder to find them, and during the breeding season they can be pretty conspicuous and loud and noisy, so they're a great bird to monitor. I mentioned before that we're working on this rocky habitat management update, which includes nominating new sites for protection, and oyster catchers are kind of like the flagship bird for that effort, because they are really tied to intertidal habitat. Go ahead, Margaret. Next slide. So when we first started this project out, we monitored abundance of birds across 75 different sites along the entire coast of Oregon, trying to cover all the rocky habitat that was accessible. And we did that. And I'll talk a little bit about those results in the next coming slides. And as I mentioned before, for the past, since last year, we've been focusing on just monitoring nests of birds. And here's a picture of a nest. I'm not sure what this one is, photo is by Colin Strong, but it is an Oregon nest. And as you can imagine, you know, if birds can't produce young every year successfully, if enough birds can't produce young, there's going to be a problem with their population. So it's a very important stage of the life cycle of a bird to monitor how successful their nests are. So this slide shows the map. Is those little purple dots are all the different sites we used to do our oyster catcher abundance surveys at. So that gives you an idea of the coverage we had. Go to the next slide. Last year, we started using an online data entry form for this project, which has been really helpful. And it was developed by National Audubon. They're also doing similar oyster catcher monitoring in a community science project down in California. So we've been collaborating with them. And so that would be something that you would use to enter your data. For this project, we collect data using paper forms. And then we, at the end of the season, you enter it into this online database. I'll go ahead to the next slide. So I don't have time tonight, like we're saying, we want to keep it real brief, just kind of give you a snapshot of these projects. But I do want to plug that we will have 2 trainings for this project. They'll be about an hour and a half long. The trainings will go into very much in depth on the life history of these birds and how to monitor them and how to use that online platform I just showed you. So the 2 trainings are May 5th. It's a Wednesday night from 6 to 8, and then Saturday, May 8th from 10 to noon. So if you're interested, you can sign up and go to the next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the results we're finding for this project. I won't get into a lot of the details, but we basically, from that abundance survey we did for a number of years, we estimated using some fancy statistical models what the population is likely to be on the coast in each of those years. So you can see on this table here, in 2015, we estimated about 629 birds, 2016, 506, and 2017, 580. The numbers in the brackets are just like the confidence interval around that estimate. And so the take-home message is just that the population in Oregon seems to be pretty small, but stable. So that's good news, at least for the information we have right now. Go ahead to the next slide. In terms of their spatial distribution on the coast, those little black dots are like, the bigger the black dot is, the higher density of oyster catchers there are at specific sites. And you can see each of those map panels is from each of those same years, 2015 to 2017. And the basic take-home message here is that a lot of the birds are on the south coast, and we didn't look at habitat or anything like that, so we can't really speculate we don't really know what's driving that, but we think it might have to do with higher quality habitat down there. There's certainly more habitat, but we did control for that in our estimate. There's also more island habitat out there, so maybe less predator access for birds, for the nests. We'll go to the next slide. And just quickly looking at our nest monitoring results, which is what we're doing, what we've been focusing in on the last couple of years, but we've been doing it all along. And when, birds, the hatching success of oyster catchers in Oregon seems to be pretty decent, 60 to 70%. And that's just, from the time the eggs are laid to when the chicks hatch. But then the fledging success is when the birds are able to fly. And it typically takes about 40 days for when the birds hatch to when they can fly. And that success is quite a bit lower. But the average fledglings per nest, which is one metric of the productivity of the nest, is about 0.55 chick fledglings per nest, which, according to some of the demographic studies out there, that supposedly is just about at the line where it supports a stable population. Why don't you go to the next slide? So I just want to talk a little bit about how we're using this information to inform conservation and policy work. Go ahead to the next slide. So one thing is just getting people like you to monitor the birds and to adopt these sites. And some people have really taken it to the next level. Like this is a woman named Karen Driscoll who used to monitor oyster catchers down at Otter Rock Marine Reserve, and she got really into it. And she would go out there I mean, multiple times a week, and not only monitor the oyster catchers, but also let people visiting know that there are nests nearby and to try and please not disturb them. And I want to at this time bring up Tabea Gosson, who is on the call here. I don't think her video is working, unfortunately, but she's been a hugely important volunteer on the North Coast at Chapman Rock and at up towards Ecola Point. So Tabea, why don't you just say a few words to the audience here about your personal experiences monitoring oyster catchers?
I started participating in the survey several years ago. And I took the Audubon training, but after the training, one of the volunteers on my route contacted me and she asked if I would be interested in having her show me the nests and help me actually physically walk me through the process. That was a great help. And it really got me started. I did the surveys for a couple years, and then last year COVID hit, and I visualized a time of quiet surveys, hardly anybody on the beach, and that was part of the game plan that I thought was going to happen for last year, and boy was I wrong. I usually see my neighbors on the beach, but I saw them all the time last year, got to know them better. It was really fun. Also got to share information with them, and I really enjoyed that. I also got started with more of the process that Joe's talking about regarding the signage and stewardship. Kelly got me set up with the signage here. Margaret got me set up with the brochures from the Lincoln City Audubon Black Oyster Catcher pamphlet. And so last year was devoted to quite a bit more education. And it really is a lot of fun when you're out there doing surveys and Nest Watch, when people are interested in asking questions and you hope that, you're having some influence on them regarding stewardship of the beach. Also, last year, early in the year, we had a couple oyster catcher chicks in trouble. Two surfers helped me get the chicks off the rock, and then I took them to the Wildlife Center. Um, they treated them. One of the chicks survived, and the Wildlife Center had not had oyster catcher chicks before, so this was a new program for them. They worked with that chick and did what they could to teach him how to be on his own out in the wild. We released him in August, and I hung out with him until the tide set. I had to leave and get back home. Right after that, the weather kind of went stormy and rainy, but I spent a lot of time out on the beach and on the rocks looking for him. Had a lot of wet, sandy, soggy days, but I finally spotted him about 10 days later. I heard him before I saw him, and he looked really good. He was foraging and flying well, and he seemed to have managed quite well with his training from the Wildlife Center. Um, in addition to that, it was also helpful for me to see how the data that I was putting together was being used. And it was incorporated into part of the Rocky Habitat update for Chapman Point and Ecola Point. So that just kind of made what I was doing a little more real. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun for me. Hopefully people are learning, and that we can have a little more protection of the wildlife on the north end.
Great, thanks Tabea, that was awesome. And it's people like Tabea that really are the heart of these projects. Let's go on to the next slide. So also I mentioned before that we use some of that data to get a new population estimate, and we ended up publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal. So it's great to get that information out there in the literature to help influence the management of the species. So go ahead to the next slide. And then I won't say much here, but just today I already kind of mentioned it, and I mentioned it before. I think that we contribute this data to a number of different networks, including the Rocky Habitat Management process that's going on right now in Oregon to help the public nominate sites for protection. And we included the oystercatcher data set as part of that mapping tool that was put out there by the state agency DLCD for us to use. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, I'm gonna talk a little bit now about seabird colony monitoring. I think the black oystercatcher part was the longest, so we're gonna go a little quicker now. We've been doing seabird colony monitoring for a number of years now at both Cape Falcon and Cape Perpetua, and also in comparison areas nearby. And the intention was to try to get some baseline information on nesting seabirds adjacent to marine reserves and in the comparison areas. So part of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's efforts with the marine reserves, they're the agency that are administering the marine reserves. They're doing ecological monitoring of the marine reserves, but their focus is below the water on invertebrates and fish species, and they don't have the capacity to monitor the birds that are using the areas adjacent to the marine reserves and the waters of the marine reserves. So that's where we've come in to try to fill that role. And it's also a great opportunity to do outreach. As we're monitoring birds with our scopes, we often get members of the public to come down and we can talk to them about the marine reserves, which is a big effort for us because we want everyone in Oregon and elsewhere to know about the marine reserves so we can increase the ability to convince people to protect them. Go ahead. This is actually not Cape Falcon. I'm sorry, back to that last slide. That was Cape Perpetua. You might recognize the seat ahead lighthouse there. But go ahead, sorry, Margaret. So those are the two sites, Cape Perpetua and Cape Falcon. Last year, because of COVID, we weren't able to run Cape Perpetua site, and likely this year we won't either because we've been relying on a Fish and Wildlife intern to help run that site while the coastal coordinator this year, Allison, runs the Cape Falcon site. So we'll be monitoring at Cape Falcon for sure. Cape Perpetua, we're still trying to figure out. But you can kind of see on that map on the right side where we already monitor that little box down there in the southern part of the Marine Reserve is where we did the monitoring at Devil's Cauldron. So go ahead to the next slide. And so we do the monitoring starting in early June until early September sometimes, depending on when all the chicks fledge. We try to visit the colony 2 times per month. Sometimes we do it every week. It just depends. As we're getting to the time when the chicks are, when the eggs are hatching or when the chicks are fledging, we try to monitor more frequently if we can. This is a view from Devil's Cauldron. You can see we have our station set up. This is a pre-COVID picture, so we'll still be doing it, but we'll have a little bit more social distancing, as you can imagine. And I guess the basic goal is it takes some patience to do this monitoring. You kind of watch the birds on their nests, and we don't monitor an entire colony. We pick a section of it, monitor like 10 to 15 nests in different sections of the colony for Brandt's cormorants, for pelagic cormorants, and double-crested cormorants. And we count the number of eggs, and then we monitor the chicks as they grow older. They get bigger, and that way we can again, like similar to the oystercatcher, we can estimate their hatching success and their fledging success. I guess you can go to the next slide. That's just a photo of one of our plots, we call them, a section of a colony where we label the nests, so that, and we print these out, we laminate them, so when we're monitoring the nests, you can find the nests. And there are other seabirds out there. There's common murres are a very common seabird, but we decided to go with cormorants because they're really common and they're also easier to monitor for community scientists. Murres don't build nests. They lay their eggs right on the rocks, and they're much more packed in together, so it's really hard to monitor them if you're not highly trained. But the cormorants, they're more spaced apart, and they build those grass or stick nests. So it makes it a bit easier to monitor them. I did want to mention that we will be doing a virtual training for the Cape Falcon seabird monitoring on June 5th. So not for a couple of months from now, but if you're interested, please join and we can send you information on that. Go ahead to the next slide. I'm not going to talk a lot about our results, but we have been monitoring at those two sites, as well as Yaquina Head is one of our comparison sites to Cape Perpetua. And we actually get our data from there from OSU, and then at Haystack Rock. And you'll hear more from Haystack Rock Awareness Program tonight too. They're a partner. We've seen a lot of variability in fledging success. This is just one graph of Brandt's, so I won't say much more than that, other than, again, it's baseline data for the marine reserves, and we do contribute it to Fish and Wildlife to update their seabird colony database. Go ahead to the next slide. I'll talk very quickly about the brown pelican survey, and then I'll introduce you to Allison, and she'll talk about the plover patrol. But we've been working with California Audubon, Washington Audubon, and some other partners to track the distribution and abundance of brown pelicans. Brown pelicans were removed from the endangered species list about 10 years ago, but they have had some nest failures on where they breed down in Southern California and in Baja California. And it's been tied to anchovies largely. And we're interested in forage fish. As I mentioned before, we helped to protect forage fish species on the West Coast. So this is another way to connect folks to a cool bird species that is a species of conservation concern, but also it connects in with our forage fish protection work. So go ahead to the next slide. And like I said, this monitoring is from Washington down to Baja California with a lot of different partners, a lot of different sites. In Oregon, we have 18 different sites, and they're just snapshot surveys. We do one survey for one evening in the spring. This year, it's going to be on May 15th. And then we do one in the fall. And we haven't set that date yet, but it's typically like in mid-September. And we will be doing a training this year for this project. So that'll be on April 29th from 6 to 7 p.m. And again, don't worry about writing these down. You can just inquire and we can let you know more about them. And the survey is if you want to do a project that's like kind of a one-off one, that's pretty easy to help with. It's just, you just have to survey for an hour at a minimum. We recommend a couple hours at each of the sites. And typically you don't drive between the sites because they're too far apart. So you'll just pick a site and go there, and either alone or with a number of people, you'll do the monitoring for that on that one day. So here's just a graph of, again, the bigger the yellow dot, the bigger the colony. And I think that's it. I want to save room for questions. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to introduce Allison now, and I'm really happy that Allison came on board Portland Audubon it's been about a month now, right, Allison?
Right.
And she's our coastal community science coordinator. So she is the on-the-ground person. She gets to do all the fun stuff and go out and do surveys. And also she gets to coordinate all you volunteers and schedule you. And so she will be your main point of contact for the plover project and for oyster catchers and for the seabirds. The pelican one I do myself because that's a separate funding bucket. But anyway, I'm going to let Allison take over from now, and feel free to say more about yourself, Allison.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I started about a month ago, and most of my experience with plovers and oyster catchers is on the East Coast. So the West Coast birds are like the dark side for me. So it's pretty fun. I'm happy to get to see them and learn more about them. Yeah, so right now I'm going to talk about the Plover Patrol Project. The Western snowy plover is really interesting story because it was a species in decline, and which led to its listing as federally threatened under the Endangered Species Act back in 1993. Since that time, plovers were non-existent in the North Coast in Oregon for quite some time. In response to this listing, lots of different management policies, laws were created, different things that were done to help plovers rebound on the Oregon coast. And that's been incredibly successful. And they're on the road to recovery, even recolonizing areas in the North Coast and beginning to nest again. So in response to that, the Portland Audubon partnered with Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and as well as several other organizations along the coast to monitor the newfound success on the North Coast. The goals of Plover Patrol are to track plover presence and nesting success. And like the Black Oyster Catcher Project and the Seabird Project, this helps to inform recovery efforts on the North Coast. It's also really great for community awareness and engagement, so people can see these tiny sand-colored birds and know that they exist on their beaches. Can you go to the next slide, please? Great. So there are 5 snowy plover management areas on the northern coast that are monitored by Portland Audubon volunteers. This volunteer opportunity is really great because, like I said, it offers a rare glimpse at this really cryptic nesting bird and a chance to protect a threatened species. Just a little bit about what monitoring entails. We ask volunteers to conduct about 2 surveys per month to document the number, locations, any bands. They have color bands on their legs to help us identify them as individuals that a plover might have. We also conduct weekly monitoring of nests at 4 different sites during the nesting season. So that's from April through September. Each survey takes about 4 hours. Can you go to the next, please? Field conditions during these surveys can be pretty physically demanding. It includes walking for miles on sandy beaches in some cases. If you'd like to participate at this level, we're offering training here in the next couple of weeks. So in fact, this week on April 2nd and 3rd, as well as on April 10th and 11th from 10 to 12:30 p.m. If you want to participate in a less physically demanding capacity, we also have interpretive walks that are starting in June. And if you participate at this level, we can also show you snowy plovers and their habitat. So yeah, keep an eye out for that as well. We have a few binoculars and scopes to lend you out, but it's also great if you have those own optics yourself. And we don't just throw you to the wolves. Like Joe said, I go out on these surveys with you and train people on how to find snowy plovers, and their nests that you can see are really great. The color of sand and shells. So they look a lot like the habitat of the beach. It's a really cool experience to be able to see that up close and personal. So if you have any questions or want to be involved in any of the projects we mentioned, my email address is down at the bottom. It's aesopcoastalbirds@gmail.com. So, okay. You can go ahead, Joe or Margaret or whoever's up next. Thank you.
Thanks so much. If folks are interested in signing up for those trainings, what do they do?
Yeah, so if you want to get involved, you can go onto our webpage and find like on the community science page. So it's under Get Involved. Or like I said, you can email at that address. Joe, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, we have event listings on the Portland Audubon webpage. If you go to the web, just type in Portland Audubon in Google, you'll get to our website. Go to, I think it's Get Involved is the menu item, and then under there is there's an events, and if you click on events and you just type in whatever project you're interested in, search, it'll take you to the events that we mentioned for the training events. And there's also a web page under the Get Involved menu for all of our community science projects. So if you want to learn more about them in more detail than we talked about tonight, you can also get more background information on them there.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. So to kind of wrap things up before we do Q&A and our prize drawing, I just wanted to talk about a few more ocean-related volunteer programs that we have on the North Coast, and some of these extend beyond the North Coast. And we actually have put together a brochure that highlights the ones I'm going to talk about and more. And those of you who included your mailing address when you signed up will be receiving a copy of this along with a few more goodies in a little bit. So you can look forward to that. And anyone else who wants a copy, just email me. So just quickly, there is a program called Coastwatch that has been around for quite some time, run by Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. And in this program, you adopt a mile of Oregon's coast and you report natural and human induced changes. And you walk your mile at least once every 3 months. There are also beached bird surveys. So for these, you conduct a monthly survey on a given stretch of beach. And you count and identify bird carcasses. So that's for those of us who have the stronger stomachs. So these are bird carcasses that wash ashore along ocean beaches. And you can learn about conservation and how to identify beached birds. And that's run through a program called COAST out of University of Washington. And their webpage is coasst.org. There are also 2 marine debris surveys, one through Coast and one through NOAA. And the information is there on your screen. For NOAA, the URL was so long, I just include the email address to the local contact. But if you're interested in that, send me an email and I can send you more detail. And then also one of our banner volunteering programs here on the North Coast is Haystack Rock Awareness Program. And we do have Kelly Ennis, who's the director of hrap, on the line. So if you would like to talk a little bit about how to get involved as a volunteer there and what volunteers do, that would be great. And I think I made it so you can talk. So
yeah.
Awesome. Success.
Yeah, it seems to be working.
Yay.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, I won't take too much of your time, but just to kind of give a quick overview, Margaret and Joe both mentioned our program quite a bit. So as you can get the idea, we are a partner with both Margaret and Joe, and as well as with a bunch of other groups. And what we are is a city-run conservation and stewardship program. So we work out of the city of Cannon Beach, and from the months of February through October, we come out at low tide, wearing some labeled red jackets and a red truck, and we set up some interpretive signage and are really just on site to help promote proper tide pool etiquette and educate visitors who come around at Haystack Rock at low tide about the wildlife and the protection efforts and anything kind of related to the ecology of the area. So our mission really is to promote stewardship through education. And something that Tabea had mentioned that I think is really, really kind of true is that stewardship breeds stewardship. So that's really the hallmark of our program. And even though we have a small set of staff, we have 14 seasonal staff, and then myself and 2 other year-round staff, the backbone of our program really is volunteering. So we have a total of, I think, 160 volunteers that come out in different capacities for different lengths of time to help us really with this education part. And the main thing that the volunteers do for hrap is part of the education. So they will come out with us at low tide. We provide all the equipment and anything that people would need, as well as training. So we don't ask that people who want to volunteer and get involved in this, that they don't have to have any experience. They don't have to have a certain set of background knowledge, and they can be any age. We have a lot of junior volunteers who come along, and we also have plenty of retired volunteers who like to join us. So really the only restriction is if you can get out onto the beach and come join us at some of those set times. We don't have any minimum hour requirements. We don't have any requirements for people to stay during the entire shift that our staff is out there. So it's really just an experience that we want to help the volunteers get what they want out of volunteering, and really just kind of act as a gateway to help support that. The other component that volunteers will be able to get involved in is we do work with all of these different citizen science projects that you heard about today. We have the black oyster catcher surveys that happen around Haystack Rock. We are a reference site for the seabird colony, and we also do the Coastwatch marine debris survey, and we do a sea star survey as well. So if getting involved in community science projects like that is something that you wanted to do, what we are able to offer is have experienced staff and volunteers help you kind of get started. We can shadow and help you out, and then that also gives you someone who is able to be around to be an interpretive staff for whenever there are visitors or other people who have questions. And if interpreting isn't something that you really are comfortable with, that can be a great way to kind of help get involved in that and learn a little bit about the ecosystem and start to feel comfortable with interpreting as well. So that's kind of the quick rundown overview of volunteering with us.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly. And I wanted to mention that volunteering at Haystack Rock and also for Snowy Plover Patrol were 2 of the first things I did after moving to the North Coast. And I really enjoyed both of them. Plover Patrol is a little bit of a workout, so that was good for me at the time. And if you're looking for that, that is a great one for you. And then Haystack Rock is so great for for meeting people and just learning so much about the tide pools and the birds. I knew basically nothing before being out there, so it's a really great opportunity. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet. So if you've been holding on to any questions, please go ahead and put them in there. There are just a couple more volunteer programs I wanted to mention. There are Sea Star surveys. They do them at Haystack Rock through Haystack Rock Awareness Program and other locations through Oregon Shores. There's also the King Tides Photo Initiative through OregonKingTides.net, and that's where you take photos of flooded areas during winter king tides. And then, and that helps sort of document changes due to, that we might be able to anticipate due to sea level rise in places where we need sort of infrastructure help. And then water quality monitoring. I see there's something in the chat. From Effie. Effie says she's seen eagles decimate the puffin population at Haystack Rock over the past few years. Is there any work being done to help puffins come back to Haystack Rock? Kelly, are you still able to talk or no?
Oh, sorry. I muted myself there. Apologies. Okay, yeah, I'm still here. About the eagles specifically, no, we don't do anything like that. We monitor. We do have someone from U.S. Fisheries and Wildlife who comes out every year and does counts on the puffin populations. He counts just total amounts of birds, but most importantly, he counts how many nesting birds that there are. And that's really, I guess, the best we can do is say that it's being monitored, and those trends are being followed along the coast with other sites numbers as well. And I don't know that they would specifically cite the eagle population. I know the eagle population is quite healthy as being the reason for why puffin numbers have decreased in a general trend over the last couple decades. Right now, one of the leading identifying factors that they found was it could be related to climate change and diet and access to the actual food out in the ocean as being a potential contributing factor. So I guess all I can offer is that researchers are working on it, and there are definitely a lot of efforts. And if you want to talk to a group that is actually working pretty hard right now on getting some tufted puffin protection and activism going on, then that would be the Friends of Haystack Rock.
So I just moved back to my slide that has their website on it, Friends of Haystack Rock, in case anyone wants to follow up with them.
I know that there is some interest in getting the bird listed. I'm not sure at the state, if it's probably at the state level and under the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah, it was denied for National Endangered Species Act just recently.
But I think at the state level in Washington, it did move forward. But I guess what I'm saying is that I know that Sean Stevenson at Fish and Wildlife is interested with other partners in getting them uplisted in Oregon, as far as I know. I don't know where that's at, but
yeah, that's the big effort that Friends is working on this year, and along with a few other different groups, is to basically see if we can set up what Washington did, which is to set your own declaration and your own management plan and work with everyone in Washington to get that going too.
So we have another question. This one is about the cormorants, Joe. What have been some of the reasons that the cormorant nests have not been as successful at Devil's Cauldron over the past years?
We do know that some of the storms have taken out some of the colonies. It's unclear if that, how that affects the nesting success, because they might be going somewhere else and setting up nests depending on when the storms happen. So if it's an early year storm where it impacts the nests and they abandon the area because of that, they may move somewhere else nearby. So I guess my answer is not great, because they could be moving somewhere else, but that's one of the main things that we've seen in terms of nest failure is storms. So I hope that helps.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And any of the rest of the panelists who want to turn on their video, that'd be great. I don't see any more questions, but if anyone else has questions to add, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. So let's see, we have a question. Are the snowy plover trainings over 2 days? So it's a logistical question about the
Can I
training.
go for that one, Allison?
Yes. So each one is over 2 days, and they're from 10 to 12:30 on each. We are also, this is, super short notice. We're also recording the presentation, so I'm happy to work something out individually about training as well if neither of those dates work. But generally, training one is this upcoming Friday and Saturday, and the other session of that training is next week, Saturday, Sunday.
Great, thank you.
And the trainings are broken down into the modules are, the first one is on life history, threats and decline of the plovers. The second one is the legal status, management strategies, and recovery. And that will be on the first day. And then the second day, survey, the module 3 is the actual kind of training of the survey itself, how to collect data, beach safety. And then the last one is a little, we call it armchair survey, for all the people that have been listening in to test their knowledge. And then we do repeat the whole thing again on April 10th and 11th. And Allison will be leading those trainings. We will have probably a person from Oregon State Parks as well, and potentially someone from Institute for Natural Resources to help answer questions.
Fantastic. And if people are just interested in learning about snowy plovers, is it okay for them to attend to?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to, it's especially the first day is all about plovers in Oregon and across their range and, everything about their life history. So that would definitely be a good day to attend if you'd like to just learn more. No obligation to volunteer at the end of it.
Great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in. So I just want to thank Joe, Allison, Tabea, and Kelly for joining me tonight and putting on this presentation and letting everyone know about the opportunities available. Is there any last parting messages, Joe or Allison?
I'll just say that today I had the pleasure, I live in Portland, so I don't get to the coast as much as I'd like, but I had the pleasure to meet up with Allison and Laurel Hillman from Parks and Daniel Farrar from the Institute for Natural Resources, and we walked along the Nehalem snowy plover management area. We saw 12, what did we see, Allison? 12 snowy plovers, and most of them had color bands, and we got color band resites on them. And then Daniel found the first nest of the season on the North Coast that we know of, had 1 egg in it. And so that's really exciting. So we were also saying how at Nehalem, it would be great to have multiple volunteers helping at the same time to do a survey, to do surveys there, because it is kind of a large site, but it's a really cool site. And plovers are all over it right now. So
yeah, the season's starting now. So we'd love to have you join us.
That's great. So fantastic. I wanted to also just thank, before people go, just thank everyone who attended tonight, who's interested in spending some of their outdoor time contributing to the health of our environment and wildlife on the coast. I mean, it's really what makes this area so special, and we just need everybody helping to keep it that way. So thank you so much.
thanks, Margaret, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, and if anyone has follow-up questions, you send them to any one of us. I'm at capefalconmr@gmail.com.